why on earth we are now housing young men of fighting age in accommodation and hotels when even our young men of fighting age, our British Armed Forces, are living in camps and barracks is beyond me.
We're just moving these people around at the moment. He's like whack-a-mole. Okay, you can get rid of them here and then they're going to pop up there and then you can, protest and get rid of them there and then they move somewhere else, but it's not changing the numbers. So I think going forward we have to have more of a focus on how do we stop this problem, because what we're dealing with now is downstream of all of these laws, and that's the problem.
As I said before, we need to get rid of the 1951 Convention on Refugees. Now, no one has said that before, and this week I've heard it for the first time being said publicly even by Penny Mordaunt, and others have been saying that. Essentially, Europe for Europeans, Africa for Africans, Asia for Asians. If you're fleeing Sudan, you go elsewhere in Africa. You're fleeing Ukraine, you come to Europe. You're fleeing Vietnam, you go to Asia. You're fleeing Palestine, whatever, you go elsewhere in the Middle East, because it's culture and it's religion that are the two critical factors.
So the mayor of Tower Hamlets, who is the leader of the pro-Palestinian Aspire Party, has said that the Cross of St. George and Union flags are dangerous, so they must come down. Now, this is the person who was flying the Palestinian flag, this fantasy country that's never existed and never will exist, right after October the 7th. And this is about, Amy's absolutely right when she says this is war, because this also represents our balkanized country, doesn't it? This is sectarian.
Hello and welcome to Newspeak. I'm Peter Whittle and I'm joined this week, as usual, by Rafe Heydel-Mankoo, Senior Fellow, Royal Historian, Amy Gallagher, always a great pleasure to have her on this show, and Dr. Philip Kiszely, Senior Fellow and National Organiser. Great segue there, Philip, because we have, don't we, quite a number of local events. You're going to give us some highlights, I believe.
Yes, there are quite a few events happening at the moment, and you can probably see them just go on the screen beneath me. There are one or two other things happening as well, Peter. The locals are going to be at the Unite the Kingdom March. I think you're going to be there as well, aren't you?
Yeah.
And that's quite an important date for us, because we're going to be there, we're going to be loud and proud with our own banner, and we're going to be marching together. So in a way, that's locals being very public and campaigning, really. So that's a really important thing. Also, and more details of this to follow, but also we have a Northern Conference. I'm just going to mention the date today. This is the 27th of September. So just put that in your diary if you're in or around Manchester, because it's going to be in Manchester, and this is a regional conference, and it's on the back of the stuff that we've already done. We did in Salisbury, which was massively successful. Yes. We have a fantastic lineup of speakers. I'm not going to mention any names yet because we're just putting one or two others in place, but I think it's going to be a really great day. I'm really looking forward to it. And generally speaking, locals is becoming much more visible. There's a lot of dynamism at the moment, and we have this new Facebook page, NCF Locals. So please do sign up to that. It's private, nobody else can see it, and we're approaching our first, it's only been going for a couple of weeks, we're approaching our first 1,000 members there. So I'm really delighted that that's going well. There's lots of really good banter on there. So lots of things happening, yes.
Great, and also thank you, Philip, for doing all of this. Great. 2 days, therefore. 13th of September is this free speech demo in London, and then the 27th of September is the Northern Conference.
Yes, Northern Conference.
Locals Conference. Right. Well, this week seemed like some good news happened, didn't it, on the front of when it came to these migrant hotels and demonstrations. I'm thinking about the court case here. Is this actually good news, or is it sort of, am I being too cynical to say it's actually creating even more problems?
Well, so for our viewers to understand exactly what happened, at the end of last week we had a ruling by the court after epic protests in Epping, where essentially on a technicality the judge ruled that on an interim basis, not a temporary basis, the hotels needed to close in Epping because it posed a risk to public safety. But also the reason, Daniel, as with most legal things, there was a technicality. around the planning application. So the hotel had been given approval to be a hotel in the planning application. However, of course, it is no longer functioning as a hotel. It's a hostel now.
Yeah.
It's a very different enterprise to how it had initially been intended. That was deemed to be a breach of the planning laws, and it's on the basis of that the judge has called for this hostel now to close at the end of 21 days. Following on from that, we had Kemi Badenoch, leader of the Tory party, and Nigel Farage both saying that they want their councils to actually use this precedent to call for hotels in their areas to be closed down. And also we've even had a couple of Labour councils say they're going to do this, and the SNP also, because they can see they're at the coalface of what's happening here. Now, these are interim measures by the court. It can be appealed by the government. But on the basis of things as they stand now, there's no reason why other councils can't use this to successfully have a similar call for these hotels to be closed down. But of course, many people are saying that this is a great victory. It is, in a certain sense, obviously a great victory. But as I've pointed out on this channel before, where do they go? It's one thing to empty a hotel, but of course you have to remember currently there are around 30,000 migrants in hotels. There are over 70,000 in private accommodation. And it's one thing to have a group of migrants in a 4-star golf course hotel. It's another thing if they're moved right next door to your family, if they're moved right across from your daughter's primary school to one of these HMOs, as they're called, houses of multiple occupancy.
Yeah.
We know that the Glasgow, Belfast, Liverpool, Coventry, Birmingham, these are the cities that have the most number of HMOs. And I fear what's going to happen is that the government is going to essentially close down these hotels, particularly those that are just male only, and say, well, we did what you asked for, that we've closed them down. But of course, that hasn't changed the problem. It's not only will make life much more dangerous on the community level, but of course, decent housing stock is being taken up then by people who have just arrived, leapfrogging over people who are genuinely in need, British people in need of housing. The solution to all this, I've said for ages, and I'm so delighted now finally to have people talking about this openly, even on the BBC, refugee camps. After World War II, there were 250,000 Polish refugees, soldiers, airmen, but also their wives and their children. 250,000, that's more than double the number of asylum seekers in this country at the moment, illegal migrants in this country. They were housed for 10, 15 years in Nissen huts and basic camps of 1940s quality levels, and they lived there for 10 or 15 years. My mother's cousins were in there. They fell in love and got married in these camps. They never complained about the conditions. Why on earth we are now housing young men of fighting age in accommodation and hotels when even our young men of fighting age, our British Armed Forces, are living in camps and barracks is beyond me.
Yes, it's just there's been a lot of pearl clutching about this use of the term even, refugee camp, hasn't there?
Yeah, it's ridiculous. Tessa Dunlop, this historian, was on Sky News saying, how can the British use the word camp? It's so reminiscent of the concentration camps which the British invented. Well, that will come as news to the people at Buckland's holiday.
I was going to say, Heidi High.
Yeah, man, as I said, we had Polish resettlement camps for years, so there's a complete nonsense done again by the pearl-clutching virtue signallers.
Do you think that is the way, though, actually, camps?
I think so. It's a deterrent as well, isn't it? In that they're, at the moment, they're really encouraged to come here because of all of these benefits, and that they know they're going to get 5-star treatment, and hopefully that would deter some people from coming, knowing that when they get here, it isn't going to be a wonderful life. But obviously, I think a lot more needs to be done. It should be said that Yvette Cooper tried to intervene on this using the European Convention of Human Rights to say that it was going against these migrants' human rights. And to me, it just shows that the solution is to leave these human rights laws and conventions. That has to be the way in the future because, as Rafe said, we're just moving these people around at the moment. He's like whack-a-mole. Okay, you can get rid of them here and then they're going to pop up there and then you can, protest and get rid of them there and then they're moved somewhere else. But it's not changing the numbers. So I think, going forward, we have to have more of a focus on how do we stop this problem? Because what we're dealing with now is downstream of all of these laws, and that's the problem.
I think there's so many things here, aren't there? I mean, it's actually 32,000 people living in hotels at the moment, and that amounts to a national emergency. If as could well happen. One local authority after another says, no, we want them out. Where do they go? And we call them fighting age men, don't we? I think we should call them sexually active age men, because I think that is much more, that is what we're talking about. And this is, again, it's about cause and effect, isn't it? And we're dealing with effect, or local authorities are having to deal with effect. But the government itself and the previous government absolutely fundamentally failed to deal with cause on every level, and they continue to do that. And the only way at the moment to push back on that, as Rafe says, is our camps. And my dad was in a refugee camp in 1959 in Italy. That's just how people deal with refugees, and always have dealt with refugees.
And I think we need to be clear here. We're talking about temporary refugee camps.
Yes.
It's not an ongoing whilst we can process and deport those who are already in houses, already in private accommodation. Because whenever we discuss this, some viewers say, well, we don't need any camps, just send them all back. Yes, we will, but there has to be somewhere to put them in.
Yeah, it's an interim. It's an interim,
temporary thing. But it also should be said, I asked, when did things change when we began to put people into hotels? Well, in 1999, of course, Tony Blair passed this Asylum Act, and that gives the Home Secretary the discretion to provide accommodation. And many people think that there is a human right and an obligation to give accommodation. Actually, in the Asylum Act, is actually at the discretion of the Home Secretary. And so what we've got now essentially is a system whereby the Home Secretary has decided that asylum seekers are vulnerable people, and they're entitled to benefits over the indigenous British population, who may themselves be vulnerable and entitled to benefits. And so, again, you have another case of two-tier Britain, whereby you have two groups of vulnerable people, but simply by virtue of one being a refugee, they're getting better treatment than the indigenous population, who may have just the same issues about housing and essential needs. And I don't think that's been discussed enough, actually.
Hello, please excuse this brief interruption, but I'd be really grateful if you could please hit the subscribe button and subscribe to our channel. Our mission is vitally important, and we must grow this channel to ensure that our content reaches the biggest possible audience. The best way to do this is for you to subscribe. It's totally free. And in addition to subscribing, if you're able to donate or join our membership scheme, please click on the link in the description or visit our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. We've got great plans ahead, but we can't do it without your support. From only £4 per month, you'll receive a range of perks and benefits, including exclusive content. Thank you. Didn't Rupert Loam talk about this at some point? Because I remember there was something, there was outrage when he said, let the midges do their work. Do you remember that in Scotland or something? I mean, where would these places go, actually? Would they be somewhere inhospitable and northern?
Well, the Tories spent...
Sorry, Philip. No, I meant sort of like up in the, in the Highlands and the islands.
The wild tundra. The tundra of the Arctic, yes.
I wouldn't walk off this ship.
No, I'm very sorry.
The Tories spent over £100 million buying land and RAF bases and to use, and they never did it. So this is not a brand new idea. The Tories could have dealt with this at the time. But I think they've been frustrated, of course, as usual, by the Home Office. I think it's the Home Office which has been at the, they are the fifth column in this country, preventing this sort of stuff from happening. But, existing military bases, but also, yes, use the Orkneys, use uninhabited places in the Shetland, make it as uninviting and as inhospitable as possible, so that you have a real hostile environment, not the milquetoast thing Theresa May toyed with, but generally make Britain less attractive than France.
Sorry, Peter, it has another function as well, doesn't it? If we actively do this and we put a mechanism in place to I think through a national emergency, actually, to be able to push this through, what it does, it has the added benefit of beginning to dismantle all of that ideological apparatus that allows for this kind of thing. So once you actually start doing something, then there's a kind of momentum that goes behind that, I think, and that has ramifications, because it feeds into, as you've just mentioned, it feeds into all walks of life, and all of the two-tier stuff, as Lenin said, all of this stuff is connected to each other, isn't it? So once you actually have an action, once you do something, once you act, then you can begin to dismantle those ideas. So I think it's very important that we really push for this.
Yeah, I think people have had a real kind of awakening in terms of this result, because this hotel has been housing asylum seekers and migrants from 2020 onwards.
Is this you're talking about the Bell?
Yeah, the Bell Hotel in Epping, and kind of on and off having asylum seekers in there. But it's only because people became aware of this issue, and there was this recent sexual assaults, and everybody's much more aware of the problem and becoming more confident in calling it out and being able to protest and not being fearful of protesting, that people intervened, and there was a result. It got, something happened and it got changed, and people are realising if we kick up a fuss and we're noisy and we get the council on our side to represent us, things can change. And I think people are kind of, thinking, oh, we could do that elsewhere. And there's more and more of us coming together thinking, well, we can show that we're not going to stand for this. And it does sound a message to the government that you can't pull the wool over our eyes anymore, that we're going to stand up to this.
Again, it's action. And
action, exactly.
It's interesting how the BBC Newsnight sort of absolutely excelled themselves this week. They had on Victoria, Derbyshire, didn't they? And this guy, an asylum seeker in a hotel, talking about how his wife, they must have scoured the country to find this. His wife was being abused or something, by English people or whatever, and how he felt frightened for her. I thought it was just obscene, the lack of self-knowledge.
Well, actually, the lack of self-awareness, because she wasn't speaking for herself. This ghastly old patriot just speaking for her.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, and it seems to be what they were discussing, what he was, took issue with was the protests. It's like you come to this country and then you want to deny people's right to protest. As soon as you land on the shores, it's unbelievable, like the entitlement that he was displaying, that you have to immediately kind of, think about me and my concerns. And
frictional one.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But the Overton window and all this is moved so rapidly in such we've been talking about these issues for years. And when we were discussing these sorts of things, refugee camps and whatever, 2-3 years ago, it really felt that it was beyond the pale, these discussions. Now it's been mainstream. Now it's on the Today programme on BBC. It's been discussed on ITV News. The next thing for me, and this is now started, is, of course, we must, as I said before, we need to get rid of the 1951 Convention on Refugees. Now, no one has said that before, and this week I've heard it for the first time being said publicly even by Penny Mordaunt, and others have been saying that. Essentially, Europe for Europeans, Africa for Africans, Asia for Asians. If you're fleeing Sudan, you go elsewhere in Africa. You're fleeing Ukraine, you come to Europe. You're fleeing Vietnam, you go to Asia. You're fleeing Palestine, whatever, you go elsewhere in the Middle East, because it's culture and it's religion that are the two critical factors that will make an asylum project successful, and where you can have integration, and also where you are geographically proximate to your homeland, because the idea eventually is for you to go back home, and you're far more likely to go back home if you're actually quite physically close to where you are. And I think that's going to be the next discussion which we must have as a nation, and I can beginning to see the start of that. And I think that's going to be the ultimate remedy to all of this. Essentially, is just to keep it all on a cultural basis.
Yeah, and again, I think it's moving, kicking and screaming into the 21st century, because everything we have in place to deal with this is post-war, essentially, isn't it? It's like when we were talking about the EU, that is a post-war phenomenon, and it deals with post-war things. But we are in a hideous new world of tyrants and dictators and Islamism taking hold with boots on the ground at an alarming rate in this country. And all of that stuff, all of the post-war stuff, all of the liberal stuff, that liberal era, it's gone. It has no relevance to today, because we are looking forward and we're looking essentially into a black hole.
The problem is with many refugees from the Middle East, let's face it, that's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Is that the other Middle Eastern countries don't want them.
No, of course they don't.
What you do then, the solution is very simple, because you have wealthy nations like Qatar, like Kuwait, like Saudi Arabia, who can pay poorer nations to take them. So it's the responsibility of each region. Now, we had that sort of plan with Rwanda. Saudi Arabia could give billions of pounds to African countries to take people from the Middle East if they wanted to, or give poorer nations within the Middle East or within the Arab world. They could house them there as well. There are easy solutions to be found, given the extreme wealth that's now present in the Middle East.
Yeah, but sometimes you just, every now and again, you'll see something that is just so egregious and so stupid. And I'm sure he's a very nice man, but Tim Stanley this week was saying, well, why can we not, if we can take so many Ukrainians, why can we not take a handful of Palestinian children? And, Egypt won't touch them. Jordan won't touch them. There are Denmark 3-1. We know why why we mustn't take them. And yet so-called conservative commentators are throwing these things out there. And I mean, he really got a good hiding for this. But it's really worrying.
Well, the thing is, I've noticed that there just seems to be this pattern. They go really quite far, in case of like Tim Stanley or other people we could mention, and then they sort of feel that they have to soften quickly, in order to keep their kind of respectability. We're seeing it, aren't we, at the moment, without digressing too much, all these sort of talk about London isn't so bad, what are you going on about? It's almost like they sort of thought, right, we've really got to go on the offensive now because, actually the reason is that their very ideology is at stake, when you're criticising
There's more of their whole identity is
their
at
whole
stake,
identity is at stake, yeah.
Buy into the whole thing.
I mean, you mentioned there, actually, Amy, about there was a sort of sense of victory, something moving. So what do you make of the Race of Colours movement? Are you buoyed up by that?
Yeah, I think it's really positive. I mean, this has kind of happened off the back of these migrant protests, hasn't it? What we started to see is people just raising the England flag in their local town. I believe it started in Birmingham, I'm not sure, but it's been happening all across the country, but in particular places that are really affected by diversity, places that have become quite Islamified. Even there you're seeing people raising the flag. Shockingly, the councils took them down, which to me, that sums up where we're at in that, we've had so many flags shoved down our throat for the last so many years. The LGBT flag, the Palestine flag, the Ukraine flag, every flag imaginable is that totally acceptable. When have you ever seen a council take down those flags? And yet, as soon as people start, defending their own culture and wanting to have their own national identity, the councils take that down. And they claimed it was for safety reasons, I believe. But it was very symbolic and very stupid because, of course, it just made people more defiant and they wanted to put them up more. And it's very hard to keep, stopping people from taking down flags. And now people are painting flags left, right and centre on zebra crossings and on all over the place, on potholes. Mostly the England flag, yeah. I think it's the England flag because it's older than the Union flag, and I think people realise that the Union flag it's kind of been attached to multiculturalism, hasn't it, a little bit, and you can become British very quickly. Whereas the England flag, the St George's flag, is saying that there's something older here with a history and a people, that we are a people. And we're always seeing other flags, Pakistani flags being put up everywhere. And people are finally saying, well, what about us? We have a people and we have our own interests. And we've been pushed and pushed and pushed to the limits. And for me, it's really, I think people's perception of flags is changing quite quickly because I think while people saw the LGBT flag and the Palestine flag as kind of annoying, I don't think people quite realised that this was a real show of dominance, that the flags are symbolic of battle and war. It's about submission. Yeah. And I think people just thought, it's just a flag. When you see a LGBT flag on the top of a church or a Palestine flag over a monument, you just think, it's just a bit of cloth. But actually, they're showing you what they are. They're saying, we want to dominate you. And I think people are realising that, this is serious. This whole business of flags that we've been seeing for years is serious, and we now need to fight back because we really are losing something here.
I think they're realising too late as well.
Are there any round your neck of the woods?
There's quite a lot, up in the north. I've seen quite a lot in Leeds. I was in Manchester the other day. Still quite a few in Manchester. But the flashpoint really was this week was Tower Hamlets, wasn't it? That was so the mayor of Tower Hamlets, who is the leader of the pro-Palestinian Aspire Party, has said that the Cross of St George and Union flags are dangerous, so they must come down. Now, this is the person who was flying the Palestinian flag, this fantasy country that's never existed and never will exist, right after October the 7th. And this is about, Amy's absolutely right when she says this is war, because this is also represents our balkanized country, doesn't it? This is sectarian, and somehow this flag that is representative of the most brutal place on earth, is being presented in this country, and Tower Hamlets is almost like a state within a country in a way. But there are others all over the place, not least near me, Dewsbury and Batley and all of those places. But this flag represents so much, so it's so important to push back with our own flag, which is about decency, which is about our culture, which is about, our heritage and our history, which is being eroded in all sorts of different kind of arenas. So I said, so for me, that's hugely important. And the other key thing here is, I think it can be used in different ways. You've already mentioned potholes. That's massively important. All the things that are terrible, let's just put a flag of St George or a Union flag on them and show them up, and let's do something about it. So I think this idea of reclaiming and this idea of identity, it's almost kind of playing them at their own game in a way, is so important to us. It's so important to the country, and it feeds into all of those other narratives, as I say, not least heritage and history.
Yeah. Do you think there was this piece in the Times this week, Rafe, by Daniel Finkelstein, and he was saying the white British, which is actually, I would say, another way of describing the English, actually, which I think is one of the reasons why the English are kind of held in such contempt by the people who do hold them in contempt, that somehow they shouldn't play the victim. Now, I wasn't even aware that they were playing the victim, actually. They have been victimized, but one thing I would say that has characterized the English is they just take themselves out of the procedure. They take themselves out of the process. They don't sort of like endlessly make claims or whatever. And it was sort of, I thought, this argument, this was a classic liberal establishment sort of, you thought, this isn't actually the problem, is it, surely, about whether they become victims or not?
No, but what you are seeing is the rise of a white English identity movement now. This is even what Professor David Betts was saying when he was discussing the chances of civil war. In other words, the sectarianism, as you had in Northern Ireland between Protestants and Catholics, you'd have here between Islamists and the white English identity movement. And it doesn't just mean white English identity movement, that it's just far-right racists. It's those people, of course, who see that they are the only ones who haven't been allowed to celebrate their identity. And the more they see their identity being eroded, the more attacks they see upon it, it provokes a reaction. Look, the English are the most loath to be patriotic. An Englishman traditionally wore his patriotism lightly, but it's got to the point where the English in England have been like a bear in a baited Southwark pit with the dog set upon it, provoking it so much, and it's finally been roused. And you must be very careful about rousing the English, and unfortunately we've got to that point, and you're seeing it demonstrated in peaceful ways, thankfully, very inclusive, encouraging ways. But this is the last stand of the English, essentially saying, this is our country. That's why, of course, it's not the Union flag, because they see the Scots and the Welsh rewarded for their progressive nationalism. They've got their own assemblies. There's no English Parliament. And then the English are finally taking a stand. And I think it's to the credit that we haven't seen the rise of anything like sort of a neo-Nazi movement or the skinheads or anything else. This has been the decent people of England standing up for their nation and for their country.
Although, you wait and see. They'll try and make it into something like that. I mean, the people who despise what's happening they will Nazify it as much as they can. I mean, they already are in many ways.
But in a way, it's quite good that they do that, because we just see how ridiculous and empty of everything, empty of humanity, empty of, loveless they are. I'm just looking at some of those things. I just tweeted something about that. I won't be told essentially what to do by foreigners or people who hate this country, and it's gone quite big. And some of the absolute hatred coming towards me is from two or three areas, really. One is kind of Islamists who always hate me, and from leftists as well. But also from liberals, these kind of wishy-washy liberals who aren't necessarily hard ideologues. There's something spiritual about it that they find repulsive about Englishness and about being proud of who they are. It's almost like existential angst. They're in crisis. And I just wonder where they are going to go from here. That's a really interesting one, because where do you go when all the news you see, and the mainstream media cannot push it away anymore? All the news we see is just a crime wave and a wave of sexual violence against women and children, and independent media will absolutely demonstrate that is the case. What do those people do? It's those people that I'm kind of interested in here. But that idea of framing this as victimhood, it's absolutely the wrong way to frame it. This is just English people standing up for what they deserve, and they are fed up of being treated like second-class citizens in their own country.
Yeah, so I completely agree. But actually, it's a very good point. What will these people do? Not that we should worry, but I think we sort of should. If things go on becoming more fragmented, and if things sort of actually kind of congeal and become more formally fragmented, whatever that might mean, there is this huge section, I would call very, very, shorthand, middle class. They have a disdain when they look at these flats. They can't help it. They have a disdain for the people. And I met some just only a few weeks ago. Very similar, very nice people and everything. But this was just completely alien to them, in a way, negatively alien.
It is going to be interesting as sectarianism rises and we become more and more balkanized. There are certain people where it's not quite sure where they're going to land yet. And you can see almost some people are kind of keeping it open a bit, because I think they're nobody knows where the land's going to lie, and things are moving so fast that we are going to be in these groups. Unfortunately, that's the way things are going, because our rights have been under threat for so long, and we've had identity politics pushed on us for so long, an asymmetrical identity politics where certain identities and groups are allowed to fight for their rights and their interests. We haven't been, and now we are. And you think, well, surely that if we're going to allow all these other groups to talk about their rights and their needs and their concerns, why aren't you allowing this group, the white English people? And we're going to become more and more, increasingly, unfortunately, a minority, in the years to come. So where will they stand on that? I don't know.
Well, I think this article that you're talking about, Peter, I would encourage people to read it, actually, in the Times, is a good example of someone trying to create a framework for himself which is acceptable to himself and acceptable to those kind of people. So, multi-ethnicity is not, let's not do any more of it, but we're not this. We're not bigots and we're not flag wavers. But I'm trying to find, because it was a really disappointing article at the end, because the conclusion was so weak, but trying to find this framework that he's comfortable with.
But of course, the Liberals created this beast, right? This is all of their doing. We were going along perfectly well as a society. We were cohesive. We didn't have any of these sorts of, we didn't view the world through the prism of race as we do now. That was foisted upon us. And people like Danny Finkelstein, he was a very decent gentleman, actually, but that piece that he wrote, which we're referring to, I thought was remarkable, because he had essentially conceded that diversity is not a strength. It was essentially saying just the opposite. Diversity is a great weakness. It's hard. And then he pointed out all the multi-ethnic societies that have ended up in civil war. And I thought, well, where were you 20 years ago banging the drum on this? Why are you only saying things now when, the horse is bolted, essentially?
And why can't you say something much clearer and much more emphatic technically, yeah.
I would say that, by the way, that those middle-class white people you're talking about, I think they will end up on the multiculturalist side. Right. If there are ever sides, I think they will. They just could not bring themselves. You've got to remember, it's so quoted, but George Orwell.
I think, as with Angela Rayner wanting to put migrant hotels around the country, I think as more and more people begin to see them in the home counties, in Wiltshire, in all these sort of England's green and pleasant land, you will see more of an uprising. But again, it probably would be the middle-class townies versus the middle-class ruralites.
Yes.
I think it's when multiculturalism comes knocking on the front door. That's when you see a change. Yeah.
Well, Philip, thank you very, very much. Thank you, Amy. Thanks, Rafe. We're just going to carry on a little bit more for our members. So if you want to stay with us, you should join. And you can see a good another 5-10 minutes. But in the meantime, have a lovely week, won't you? Bye-bye. Our mission at the New Culture Forum is and always has been to defend and celebrate Britain's history, culture, and its people, and indeed Western civilization, at a time when both are under sustained attack. We have grown from small beginnings to become the country's most influential right-leaning cultural think tank. Our content is watched and read by some of Britain's most influential political figures. But now, we need your help. If you believe in what we do, then please do become a member. For as little as £4 a month, you can make a vital contribution to what we do. As a member of the NCF family, you will help ensure that we can continue to produce quality content online, such as our 3 weekly programs, Whittle, which is our flagship interview show, Newspeak, our panel discussion show, and Deprogrammed, which is targeted at Britain's youth. As you probably know, in addition, we produce important documentaries, such as our critically acclaimed 6-part series, The West, a stunning celebration of the history and genius of Western civilization, and our ongoing documentary series, Heresies, with hard-hitting episodes tackling subjects such as immigration, gender ideology, and BBC bias. But the New Culture Forum is much more than a YouTube channel. We don't just complain about Britain as it is, we provide real solutions and clear policies on how we can push back against the madness and restore sanity to this nation. Our presenters are now highly sought after and have become familiar faces across the media. Our prestigious annual Smith Lecture and our regional and indeed national conferences have attracted world-class speakers. Perhaps most importantly, we are the only organisation on the right of politics that has launched a national movement without actually being a political party. And uniquely, through our NCF Locals programme, we've established some 30 active branches in towns and cities right across the nation, from Edinburgh to Exeter, and with many more on the way. We're very proud of what we've achieved, and our members have made it possible. In return, our members receive access to exclusive content, invitations to private events, free or discounted tickets to our conferences and lectures, free copies of our books, and much more. I very much hope that you'll join us too by clicking the link in the description or going to our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. Now is the time that we need your help. Thank you.